Welcome to this latest episode of Circle Back. I'm your host, Sam Davidson, and welcome to our newest edition, our newest episode. As always, Circle Back is brought to you through the generosity of the Beth and Randy Chase family and in support with the Nashville Post. My guest today is somebody that I've admired for a long time and have become friends with, which is even richer, even better. Our guest today is Will Acuff, here to talk about his entrepreneurial journey and his new book. We're excited to get going. Will, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Sam. This is the first time we've ever not been moving, right? Like we're always walking.
Well, that's not my choice. You, at whatever point I was like, man, I got to talk to this guy. I got to meet this guy. I knew what you were doing with Corner to Corner and thought it was so cool. And you were like, great. I take my meetings by walking. I'm like, okay, all right. Steve Jobs. You read a Steve Jobs book. Good. And so the first one we met at the farmer's market, we're doing laps. It was raining, but we could kind of like go in and out.
It was a drizzle.
It was okay, sure. But the second one, I was here and we started walking around the EC. It was like February. And thankfully I had a cup of coffee to keep my hands warm and like rotate them out. And so I'm waiting for either the 99-degree day, the tornado, I guess would be a, before we get into why walking meetings?
Man, I love movement, like just period, and where I can get it, like let's make it happen.
Yep.
But the bigger thing is I find that sometimes side-by-side conversation encourages more vulnerability and openness, right? Like think about you're in the car, with that dear friend or the spouse or your kid, do you know what I mean? And like maybe the night before you were asking your daughter, hey, what's going on at school? Crickets, right? They're just like, leave me alone, let me eat dinner, right? The next morning on the drive, something magical happens with that side-by-side. So I've always been a fan of that combo, side-by-side of movement.
And that's true. Again, I've loved our conversations and glad we get a chance to do this. So now, we're face-to-face and starting off so far so good, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, so look, the first question I always open with, tell me a story about entrepreneurship, about entrepreneurs. Who was the first entrepreneur you ever knew or remember meeting?
Yeah, so I'd actually say my dad was the first entrepreneur. And my dad was, we were a family from the South. I was born in Durham, North Carolina. But when I was about 3, we moved to New England outside of Boston so my dad could go to seminary. And the plan was like, go up there, head straight back to the South. But he got caught up in this interesting world that's referred to as church planting, right? These are the entrepreneurs of the faith-based space, right? And so we as a family stayed in Massachusetts. And in 1985, my dad started this small church in the office of a gas station, right? Like bring your own folding chair and or tambourine kind of vibe. He's since been like, Will, it wasn't a gas station. And I was like, what was it, Dad? He was like, it was a car wash. I was like, not better.
Not better.
Like that doesn't wash that out. So I would give my dad a ton of credit. And both my older brother, John, and my younger brother, Bennett, are entrepreneurs. And so I think we got that from seeing that formed out. Big time.
And what about you? What was the first entrepreneurial thing you ever did, whether it was a business or a lemonade stand or what?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely did all that stuff like as a kid, right? But I'd say the first thing I was like, I will make this work. That kind of entrepreneurial come hell or high water vibe was I started a band in college.
Perfect.
And approached it with like, it's great that we can write some songs and get on stage, but like, what does this look like to build something?
Right. We're Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. How soon can we get there?
Totally. I mean, we got to the level of like, we opened up, we did live at the Apollo in Harlem and did not get booed off, which is like my claim to fame.
Yeah, it's a good one.
And we opened up for Wilco one time, and like, then I was like, we've done it. We've made it.
Mission accomplished.
It's time for me to get a job that actually pays.
So we'll lead up to that Wilco moment, but walk us through. So, either from the car wash when you were a little kid and watching your dad start this church, early years, school, what did that kind of look like for you growing up?
Yeah, so we grew up in what I would describe as like a really fun, lively, fast-paced, primarily Portuguese immigrant neighborhood. That's where I grew up.
In the Northeast?
In the Northeast. So like if you're familiar, halfway between Boston and Worcester, where unless you're from those towns, you don't even know you're in a new town. They just kind of stack on top of each other. So I grew up in that kind of neighborhood and thought that was just like normal, right? Like, how to swear in Portuguese, you know what I mean? Like that's just what's up. So that was, ages, kind of 5 to 18. But when I was a senior in high school, I really felt like, man, I'm going to follow my dad's path of some sort, right? It wasn't clear exactly what, but felt that kind of pull. And so I applied to 2 colleges out of state, UNC and NC State down in North Carolina, because that was like, the home turf. And plus, I was convinced that New England winters, you don't have to do that, right? Like there's jobs and economies in other places, So I applied to these 2 schools, did not get into Carolina out of state. Like I needed to be about 50% smarter than I was, but got into NC State, and sight unseen, that's where I headed off for college. And then I've never lived in New England since.
And so at NC State is where we do the band?
Yeah, at NC State, I'm studying communication and philosophy, and thinking, maybe I'll go to seminary like my dad or something like that. And then I just fell in love with rock and roll guitar, and I was doing, you talk about entrepreneurship and like, what will you give up to make this work, right? And I remember, I had loans, I had a job always, right? And I had this option of like having enough to eat for November and December, or buying this guitar that I was convinced would take my band to the next level.
Right.
And I was like, okay, I think I can scrape together enough borrowed food for those 2 months to make this work. Yeah. Let's buy that guitar. So that was where I really started. What does it look like to cast a vision and invite people into it, and then do the behind the scenes hard work to carry it out? All traits that at the time I wasn't thinking entrepreneurial,
right?
But I think looking back, it's like, oh yeah, that's that stream of thought.
And was there any kind of aha moment within that activity where you were like, I don't know if I'm going to, or did you think you were going to be a forever musician? Were you like, no, I'm going to do this for whatever, and then I'll get a job and a family, and like, how far in advance were you thinking, I guess?
Yeah, I was definitely not interested in like a typical path, like I knew that really firmly. And had that, internal North Star sense, from a very early age. But coming out of college, I updated the band with musicians from UNC, from their music school. Yeah. Because they were all, amazing players. I was the worst player in the band, like by a lot. But they had the chops to really take this thing further. So that's what I was doing like at night, right? We'd play shows Thursday, Friday, Saturday, do a daytime show at like a Barnes and Noble, acoustic vibes on the drive home, and be ready for work at Monday morning, right? And then my day job, I was a research analyst at Duke University in health policy. So coming out of college, I was like, I can do something that scratches my nerd itch by day, but at night, I'm really putting in the reps to try to make this happen. But over time, I noticed something internally shift. Like what had been with the band really fun and joyful and this creative adventure started to become more and more like me building my own ego thing, and that path probably would have continued like that. But I met this epidemiologist from UNC, expert on the global AIDS pandemic, right? This is 2002. So, right, medicines are just coming online in America, but like pharmaceutical prices, all the other, tariff kind of challenges, et cetera. In Africa, right, the pandemic is raging. And this epidemiologist had us meet at his house for 6 months prior to this trip to Nairobi. So we're reading like, hey, this is what happens with, if North America economic policy looks like this is what's shaken down in sub-Saharan Africa, right? And I had never even, to even frame something like that. I was like, what universe did I just step into, right? And that guy and the way he poured into me, and then that trip kind of T-boned my life in the best sort of way.
Was that trip work related? Did you go on the work for work, or was it just like a volunteer to help people or whatever?
It was a volunteer thing, but it wasn't like we're going to go do something, right? It was, hey, it was purposely situated as we are going to go learn from business leaders and faith leaders
in Africa.
We're going to learn from what they are doing in the face of the AIDS pandemic. And then coming back to the US, if they have asked us to do anything. Like, hey, for example, we worked with this group of women who were creating these handmade rugs, and they needed access to a rug market. It was like, cool, we can work on that. North Carolina, the North Carolina furniture world, right? High Point, all of that stuff. We can maybe build some bridges. But we weren't going over there to do, we were going over there to learn. Yeah.
And did you, you mentioned this T-boned your life. I like that word picture there. How soon after returning was that T-bone, or was the planning or the change that resulted from that trip? Was this sort of a slow marinating thing, or you're like, nope, I'm doing this, changing this, quitting this, moving on this?
Oh man, I wish I'd been that mature.
Mature to what? To wait or to move quickly?
To move quickly.
Okay.
Yeah. So I knew, like, I was having, anytime we have a massive paradigm shift, right, in our life, like my worldview fell apart on that trip, and I didn't even know I had a worldview, right? And so there was this internal dissonance and going, oh, if this is true in the world, then what am I going to do about it, right? And cliche story to say, like, middle-class white boy, has to go to Africa to realize poverty is real, right? But like, that's what happened for me. And I came home from that, and I knew internally, hey, there's a different path before you. But the band and like how good that felt and the ego, hit that gave me, I was like, I hear that, but over here.
And had Wilco called at that point?
Man, I think, no, that happened like 9 months after that.
Okay.
Yeah. And like, huge Wilco fan, like hanging out with Jeff Tweedy, like that's, awesome. On my bucket list.
That's right.
And like that happened,
Yeah.
And so there's a part of me that's like, yeah, good move. Like live in the dissonance for a while. Sure. But, I think, whether you're coming from a faith background or not, like I just, there are these moments where the universe is saying, this is the path for you. And you know it, right? Like you feel it. And I think when we ignore those whispers, maybe, next thing we get like kind of the sledgehammer call, and that happened for me where I ignored it for as long as I could. And then on my honeymoon with my wife, like this is our honeymoon. Oh my gosh, all the dreams, we had a health crisis. Our honeymoon ended in the ER, right? Never a good sign if your honeymoon requires your mom comes and bails you out from the ER.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
That's about right.
Like it was so good, right, honey? Right? Like not
Do it again.
No, it was like, oh, so our honeymoon was trauma. Cool. Right? And we came home from that, and everything we thought our life was going to be about was over, right? And it took 2 years of really kind of going through that intense suffering and going, okay, what are we going to do next? And that was when, like, listening to that call or that internal sense of like, ooh, we came out of that and said, okay, we want to figure out what does it look like to show up with neighbors really, really well, right where they're at, right? And so in the midst of those conversations, my wife and I, we moved off of Dickerson Road here in downtown Nashville 18 years ago into a historically low-income neighborhood to learn how to be with neighbor on their own terms. Yeah.
And so walk me through a little bit more of that process, because still when that happens, come back from Africa, play music, honeymoon. Are you guys still in Raleigh at that point? You still got the same job?
We're in like Chapel Hill.
Okay.
Yeah,
still
we're in
the triangle,
RTP.
still in that area. Yep. Good job, decent job, steady job.
I'm working at Duke University with great benefits. And
so like you can kind of milk the next 50 years if you want to.
Oh, totally. And the professor I was working for is like, hey, like I'm getting published, right? And he's like, you're fourth author, but if we do this and that, you could be, so like if you look up some obscure medical journals,
that's right.
S. Will Acuff, that's how I put my academic name into the world. So I had a path there. But I absolutely knew that was not the long-term thing.
And so what, is there a moment, it sounds like a couple conversations, more than that, but when you and your wife were like, all right, pack it up, go, we're out of here.
Yeah. I mean, the first thing was like, we had some friends who were like, we're going to relocate to Nashville.
Wow.
And so, you're in your early 20s, like the most you've got is a dog. You're like, cool, sounds fun.
That's right.
So we were kind of like agnostic to location,
Okay.
right? But we knew we wanted to be in this type of neighborhood to show up and learn what we felt like we couldn't learn any other way. Like that kind of learning where you just have to do it by living. And so that we landed, that was 18 years ago. And we showed up going like, we don't know what's actually happening here. How do we build relationships? How do we engage? And we were received with so much grace and love, because I cannot tell you how many times I put my foot in my mouth,
In the neighborhood.
In the neighborhood. Like, oh, I thought this is what poverty was, or I thought this was the real story. Oh, thank you, neighbor, for caring about me enough to go, hey, you're being kind of an idiot, right?
Sure.
And we had those moments over and over again, while simultaneously my wife, Tiffany, who's amazing and the co-founder of Corner to Corner with me, Tiffany started working behind bars as a former offender job training specialist. In other words, she was helping justice-involved neighbors come back to the neighborhood with an anchor of stability with employment. And so at that point, we just kept an open front door and started doing life with these neighbors, because they were coming home to their neighborhood and we just happened to be there. Do you know what I mean?
And you get to Nashville, she gets this job. What are you doing how are you earning money? How are you guys eating? Back to this, like, can I have food for November and December? I got some guitars. Do you feel like you're back in that, like, oh man, what are we doing? I had this career path. I could be an academic author and researcher. Two, well, one could argue this was an entrepreneurial act in of itself, starting over, creating a new thing. But yeah, tell me about the practicality. Was there fear there? Was there hope? Was there excitement? Was there possibility? How did you feel like, and what did people say when you told them, we're moving this area on Dickerson Road, and we're just going to be neighbors with people. And Tiffany's working in prison, and
very few people understood it.
Of course.
And I would say emotionally, it was all the things you described. Right? There's some, any entrepreneur who's honest has an intimate relationship with fear. Right? And if you're going to stay in the game for a long time, you better get comfortable with that and learn how to process it in healthy ways. Right? So that was happening, and a ton of hope, and a ton of, oh my gosh, like, I can't believe all the beautiful opportunities that are happening, right? Because say what you will about Nashville and its growth, we get the reputation for being a volunteer state for a reason, right? And so we were seeing really cool things happening in the community. So there was very much like a spirit of, oh, something beautiful could happen. Weren't sure what form it would take, right? We're just in a learning kind of phase. And so by day, I'm working in, the technology space. So I become a certified Scrum Master, product owner, agile methodology, all of that. I also go ahead and start getting my master's. So I'm helping manage a strategic, B2B and sometimes B2C software team. And we're living in the neighborhood. And so Tiffany's job, as you'd imagine, is not putting a lot of money away.
Sure.
So I was, carrying a lot of that at that point. But then when we had this moment of like, we're not seeing the thing we think could be here, right? Which I think is a common, like, that's the entrepreneurial
101, man. Yeah.
Right. And I think I would define it as, there was a ton of amazing nonprofit work and definitely programmatic work, but often in what we would volunteered for, like a relationship would start during the 10-week program. And then as soon as it was over, the relationship would fade away, right? Meanwhile, the relationships in the neighborhood were getting deeper and more mutually life-giving, which I would define as like, that is the city we want to live in. Right? We don't want to live in a city where like nonprofits are up here and neighbors are viewed as victims, right? Like, that sucks. Nobody wants that. We actually want to be together, right? And like, what's the best you're bringing to the table, and what's the best I'm bringing, right? And so that was the first articulation of the gap we saw, which was like, hey, what would it look like to focus on economic opportunity, but do it in a relationship-centered way where we're creating opportunity for everyone to thrive together?
And how does that statement, what you just said about what if we did it this way, at the time, is that idea seen as radical, revolutionary, not going to work? That's not how philanthropy works. What, all of it? Okay.
Yeah, all of it.
Great.
Man, I can't tell you how many times, like, I won't name names because they'll probably listen to this and they're still loving friends.
Sure.
But they were basically like, this sounds crazy and dumb, and high likelihood of failure. And even, as we shaped the work, because we iterated a bunch in those early days, like, what's the right economic development vehicle, right? And when we landed on entrepreneurship, I remember talking to some awesome leaders in the city. And they would say things like, man, business is so hard. Why would you help, historically low-income neighbors start businesses? This seems like you're setting them up for failure, right? Why wouldn't they just come work for me? Like, that's a true, and I said, well, the same reason you wouldn't work for somebody else.
Yeah.
Right. And so, yeah, if you're going to start anything, be ready to take some heat.
And what year is that when they're like, okay, we've got it. How long had you been living there, meeting, building these relationships, building this trust? What year do you finally say, okay, I think we've landed on this idea?
Yeah. So 2007 to 2011, we're living in the community and Tiffany's working at the men's prison. 2011, we go, wait a minute, we should formalize something, right? We weren't even a registered nonprofit at that point. We just started the work. And the first thing out the gate was to go, I'll back up. I think often we accidentally take a posture of, I know how to fix you, low income neighbor, right? And then we build something, and then we market and try to get you to us, right? And you see it with businesses all the time, right? Like, I know a solution. It's like, awesome. Did you talk to 10 potential customers? Right. Oh, you didn't? I don't actually think you have a solution.
That's right.
Right? And so the first thing that we did in 2011 was go to our local rec center where the life of the neighborhood was already happening, right? And go, hey, what could we do together? And those were like 3 months of iterative conversations where then we're like, okay, first thing we're going to do is we're going to run Tiffany's amazing program, which she had now designed and retooled and done all the things. And we're going to lead that at the rec center. And we have no idea if it's going to work.
Yeah.
Right. And I'll never forget night one, we've got like our friends who are cooking dinner in the rec center, kitchenette. And I'm standing in the lobby with a whiteboard that says like free jobs training class. And exactly 0 people will talk to me.
Perfect.
Right. For like 25 minutes. Wow. We should have started this thing 15 minutes ago. No one's talking to me. But now you can start to smell the food, And so finally a couple people go, now what's happening down there? And I was like, oh, y'all, it's this. And even if you don't like it, the food's going to be amazing, right? And by the end of that first night, we had 5 folks. And then next week it was 10, then 15, then 20. And so from 2011 all the way up to 2015, we're doing a bunch of different programs, but are really centered around how do you help folks who are justice involved, but who are back in the community, get meaningful employment, right? And stay out, right?
So this at this point was job training more than entrepreneurial education, a combo of both?
It was, we were organically doing a little bit of both, right? Because if you're going to be talking about, folks who are justice involved often don't have choice in the same way that a lot of us do, right? When it comes to employment. So it's like, I was trying to get that job, that door's not opening. So I'm going to figure out how to do like an ice cream cart in the summer at the park. You figure it out. So it was organically touching both, but we got to a point, this is around 2015, our neighbors were like, hey, we don't need your help getting a bad job anymore, right? They're like, the city's getting crazy expensive, and no matter what our background is, we can get a job, and it's not paying us enough to get through the month, right? We're having to make really tough decisions. And so it was around then that we were like, okay, let's just focus on entrepreneurship.
And what were you doing through this process professionally? Because as you're talking, I'm like, Center Source. We first met at a Center Source mixer.
Yep, that's right.
One afternoon.
Nick Holland.
Those things were legendary, man.
Yeah, dude.
So again, like, Will, you got a great job, it seems like. You're busy, you got a career ahead of you.
Totally.
What are you doing, man?
Yeah, I'm making bad choices economically.
But there's an opportunity. And again, maybe that's what we see it every day here, where it's like the entrepreneur sees something, they get some traction. At some point, they've got to make a leap.
Absolutely.
Did you feel like at what point was that leap? Why? And then what were again, fear, all the stuff from when you first moved from North Carolina to here all over again? What are we doing?
Yeah, totally. I mean, and this is the journey, right? The journey is an upward spiral, right? The circles get tighter, right? But the risks get greater in some really meaningful ways. Yeah. And I'll kind of double click there. Like, so I have a conversation with the owner of Center Source, right? And shout out to Nick Holland, still dear friend today. Yeah. Working amazing work at HubSpot now on the AI side. But Nick and I go out to lunch and he's like, dude, and he knew all about like the side hustle nonprofit we're doing, right? And he was like, hey, I've got some new opportunities for you. And this is what they are, right? And it's a beautiful vision for my future, right? And anybody who knows Nick, like he is a very persuasive gentleman, right? I think we were at Taco Bell. That's where we used to go to lunch a lot, right? And he lays this out, and he's talking about the details, and it just instantly was clear. And I said, man, thank you, and no.
Wow.
And in fact, we need to start building my roadmap. I'm going to go full time, into this nonprofit work.
Yeah.
And so, Nick, again, like turns into helping me strategize and think through it really well, right? That's the kind of guy he is. And I go home and I tell Tiffany, and I'm like, so, hey, this
big news,
had this great opportunity.
Got offered a promotion.
Could have been pretty amazing for us as a family. How did you feel about retirement again?
That's right.
Okay, cool. We're not doing that. Right. And Tiffany, to her credit, was like, yeah,
wow,
let's jump. And part of our, even our dating story was like, we wanted to live a life of purposeful adventure. Not adventure that's like, let's see how many countries we can visit. Sure. Do you know what I mean? But adventure that moves the needle for neighbor, right? Like that was in our kind of, DNA story. So as scary as that was, like we knew that we were both in it.
Yeah.
And so, the very first thing we did was like, all right, let's, file the nonprofit paperwork, see if we can get a lawyer to do that pro bono.
Sure.
Right. Because we don't have the money. And let's figure out what it would take to raise. I think our first year goal was like, well, let's raise $40,000 to get this thing going. Yeah.
And Corner to Corner was the name of it from the start?
By that point, Corner to Corner, when we started in 2011, it was like the thing that Will and Tiffany do on their porch at the rec center. Yeah.
And then now we're official, we're incorporated, we're raising money. Early years of Corner to Corner, what did that look like when you're in it full time, number one, but you'd already been in the neighborhood. People knew you've been doing this thing at the rec center.
Yep.
How were those early years, the startup years of Corner to Corner?
Yeah, I mean, so we knew, it was really clear, like if you're thinking product market fit, right? We knew job training stuff, at least our angle on it, was not going to be the real thing, right? But we knew economic opportunity was still a massive driver, right? Like the level of economic disparity in some of our communities is massive, right? So it was more like, oh, the problem is still the problem, but the solution set needs to change, right? And so that was when we were like, okay, cool. We started going, who is doing entrepreneurship training in historically low-income neighborhoods, right?
What's that answer?
So we went to conferences. I'm watching YouTube videos. We're like trying to find the thing. And we found, actually in our own backyard, the Launch Chattanooga team. And they had a curriculum based on the Lean Canvas model, right? Highly visual, written at, an accessible reading level, right? So, and with no technology. So there's no, some of the barriers, right?
Yeah.
And so we're like, okay, cool. What would it take to license that curriculum and get it here, right? And I remember they told me the price tag, and I was like, that is 80% more than we've ever raised. You know what I mean? Like it was... but we just started figuring it out. I mean, when you're starting, and your audience knows this, you have to be like, I think about like the ant who's trying to get to their destination. Like you can run into a rock wall, or a creek, and the ant's going to figure out a way. And you have to have that mentality. If you don't, my recommendation would be go do something else.
Well, and that's where, as you're mentioning these things from your background, I know we still have more to talk about, but from the honeymoon in the ER to, hey, let's move to this, neighborhood and place we really haven't lived, and let's start this thing at the rec center, and let's raise this money. I mean, I don't know if it's a smarter person or a less ambitious person would have been like, no,
Probably
no, no,
both.
no, no. Right. So what do you attribute that to, this idea of, like you said, the ant, that's a perfect metaphor, but we'll figure it out. I mean, what keeps you going? Because I think this is what every entrepreneur faces, social entrepreneur, whatever you want to call it, any category, any industry, is you're going to hit these walls. And so why, how did you guys say, well, let's figure out a way around it or over it or under it?
Yeah. I mean, for me, it is the joy. Like straight up. I know nothing better in life than seeing a neighbor who has the lights come on and go, wait a minute, right? Like I can do this, right? And I don't have to do this alone, right? I don't know, like that is the experience that I am chasing, right? Like, so when it comes down to, will this be hard? Will you get rejected? Will people misunderstand you? Like all of the things, yes, they will. And you remember, like I remember what it was like in our first graduation, right? We had 13 people come through and we were ecstatic, right? And we borrowed the nonprofit offices of a friend to hold our graduation. Mignon Francois, first graduation, speaker. Thank you. Shout out to the Cupcake Collection.
She's fantastic.
She is.
Yeah, been on our board. She's been in that chair. So
yeah, still the
fantastic.
best red velvet cupcake in Nashville for my dollar.
Partial to carrot cake, but
oh man, we can
we're
arm
just
wrestle
talking
about
about this
later.
so you can drop them off. I hope she can hear this and drop them off.
Yeah, I would love a half a dozen
That's
right
great.
now.
Anyway,
yeah, so we're at this night, and we had 13 graduates, right? And there's this young girl who came to every class at the rec center, a business training class at the local rec center, right? With her mom. She's 13, her mom's there, and this young woman was setting the pace, right, for the class. And you always feel that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And we asked her to speak at graduation and share. And there's maybe 40 business folks in the room who are kind of like, what is this thing that this rando called me about? You know what I mean? It has that spirit. And she gets up and she goes, well, here's my name and my business is all about, connecting young girls like me with each other off the internet. Right? She's like, and so I do custom greeting cards and buttons that we can make and share and right? And she's sharing this. And every adult's like, oh my gosh, I wish like my daughter would, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I can't get him off the phone.
Yeah.
Who is this golden child? And then she goes, and by the end of Q2, I want to sell 100 units, right? And it was like, what? Right? And it was like, I mean, I still get goosebumps thinking about it, right? And Mignon stands up and goes, darling, I'm buying your first 100 units tonight. Wow. And then immediately somebody else stood up. It was like, I'm buying your second 100 units tonight. And you saw her shoulders, right? Like this is her first public speaking moment. Like her posture changed. And in real time, you saw her horizon shift. Like, what could I be doing with my time that's better than that?
And when you see those moments, especially that first graduation, was there a relief for you, a justification, a pride? I'm like, hey, I think this might work out.
I was like, oh my gosh. No, in that moment, I didn't know if we had something, until like that moment happened, right? And now fast forward, right? All these years later, that was 2016, that first graduation moment. Another one of the students who was there that night, Marcus Buggs, he's got Conehead's food truck. Yeah. He's got Plain Jane's, the high-end cocktail lounge. He's got Cal's Country Kitchen, right? Like the journey unfolds.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you get that first graduation. Hey, let's run it back. Let's do this again. Now, 9, almost 10 years later, at what point on that journey does the ambitious goal setting start? The first time you and I go for a walk, you're like, we have this 10,000 businesses.
Yeah.
And
that's the goal. We don't have them yet, but we're going to get there.
But where do you, right, from that first night
to
start really dreaming big, when does that start? Who else comes to the table versus like, that's pretty good. I guess we'll do another, half dozen, couple dozen people, and this will be nice.
Yeah, I think two things happened for me. One, like at the end of the day, like the logic model of something really matters to me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I start digging into the research, right? Of going, essentially, like if you look at the stats around low income communities, right, and minority communities and all these other factors that are kind of, overlaid across urban centers in the United States, right, you start to see a big gap in ownership, right, that we know is not a talent gap, it's an opportunity gap, right? And so as you start to crunch the math around that, you go, oh, wait a minute. We were really excited about 13, but the actual gap, best we can tell, is around 10,000. Huh. Okay. So if we're really going to solve the thing, that's what we're going for. Huh. What would it look like to create 10,000? And then you just start building backwards.
Yeah.
Right. And that was when, that graduation is November, like mid-November, 2016. By December, first week of December, I'm on the phone with the people who wrote the curriculum and I'm going, hey, I want to do something different than you've ever done before. They're like, okay, what are you talking about? I was like, can you guys come up and start training our graduates? And I know we have this licensing thing, but I want to pay you guys whatever you need so that it is community led, because that's how you scale, right? We have to have our graduates who are early stage starters. One, they get better themselves because they're teachers now, right? You want to learn something, teach it, right? And we now have this pool of amazing neighbors as the like evangelists for this thing. So could you guys do that? And they're like, oh yeah, I think we could. And like we negotiated a price. They came up. And then so immediately it was like one site turned to two sites. Right. And like, so that's kind of how it flowed from there. And then it wasn't until, Shana Berkeley, who's our executive director, the incredible and always fashionable Shana Berkeley, she came through the program in the fall of 2017 as a student. She's, lawyer by day, but running a fashion business by night, right? Like kind of superhero vibes. And she came through and started volunteering. And I was like, Shana, you have the chops to scale this to the next level. And so I invited her to lunch, and she'll tell you, she's like, I shouldn't have said yes to that lunch. But we had lunch and I was like, hey, this is, would you consider taking this job? And she was like, she did that like thing that happens in kind of the Bible Belt South, where somebody goes, oh, sure, I'll pray about it. Like that is a Nashville no friend.
Yeah, that's right.
Right. Like I just want to let you, if you've ever received that, that's what that means.
Yeah.
But fast forward, like 4 months later, she's like, I can't stop thinking about this.
Wow.
And she's like, and she put a number up that wasn't extraordinary, but it was, nonprofit stretch, right? Or at least stretch for me at the time. And she's like, oh, so I don't think this guy can pull it. This isn't the thing. And she was right? Like I didn't have that was the exact
You
number.
had to go pray about it.
Yeah. Then I was like,
for real, pray about it.
Yeah. Well, so what's funny is like I got off the phone with her and I called this one dude I knew. Like I had, when people in the nonprofit talk about like, oh, major donor networks and blah, blah, blah. I didn't have a network. I had a Uno. You know what I mean? And I called him and I said, hey, I need this much more. Are you in? And he was like, oh yeah, dude, I'm in. I called her back within 10 minutes. I was like, job's yours. Let's go.
That's right.
And Shana has taken it to where it is now. Like I just all congratulations to her and her skill set.
In that decision process for you to say, you know what, someone else can take it farther, faster, bigger.
Yep.
I mean, what's that? Because come on, dude, finally, after all these other good jobs, you got a good job again. You could be known for that. You could be talking about this. You could, be the example for not just let's help these people, but actually let's help them start businesses and let them help other people start. Like you could have been doing this. Why hand over the reins just when it's like getting going and getting growing?
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, I firmly believe that you can accomplish anything you want as long as you're not having to take credit for it. Like that is the real deal. So much of the business space is self-promotion and self-protection.
Absolutely. Right.
And it's not all that different in nonprofit. It just seems a little softer. Right. And so that was not, I knew that was not the way that I was called to live my life. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember the first corner to corner graduation I go to. I see you, and I look, you got a name tag on, and it just says volunteer. I'm like, this guy started. Somebody gave him the wrong name tag. This guy started this thing. It says volunteer, and you're doing 100 things. You're taking photos. You're greeting people. Come on, dude. Just take a little credit.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe one day.
One day.
One day.
So that's Shane is. You're right. Crushing it. Volunteers, great staff. I've met so many of them. Each graduation builds on the previous one.
Yep.
Because you got a great point. You guys have not just created businesses or graduates. I mean, you created a community that continues to come back and continues to support each other, cheer for each other. They're like the events. When I went to the first one, I was like, I'm not missing another one of these. So they're fantastic.
Yeah, and thank you, by the way.
They're awesome. I can't wait for the next one. So tell me more about Shana Takes It. You're still involved. Mm-hmm. You're around. You're helping. You're still very much part of promoting it, advocating for it. So what are you doing now? Yeah. And then lead us up to the book, No Elevator to Everest.
Yeah. Yeah. So fast forward, Shana took over the academy program. And then after about 18 months, she took over executive director. Okay. Right. So I stepped down from that role. And my focus at that point was, how do you actually raise the financial support to scale this, right? And just for numbers' sake, so people can get a framing on this, like at this point, we have 1,432 graduates. And last year, collectively, we put 37 million. If you look at the SBA numbers, 39.3. If you look at some of our internal data, right? So massive economic impact that's turning into a college savings fund for the first kid in your family to go to college. It's turned into a down payment on a first home, right? We're talking real change for families. And so my focus became, one, how do you help people know what the landscape is and invite opportunity? And so and Sam, you and I have had this conversation a bunch where if we think about the typical business ecosystem in the US, we like to think of it as that 10-rung ladder, right? And we have great programmatic services that will take somebody up around the 5 mark, So you've already kind of churned through those first scary moments. You're hitting $250,000 to $500,000 in revenue, right? I think about the EO, the Entrepreneurs Organization. Their work in terms of building community, transformational, right? And to get into catalysts around $250,000,
That's
right? And even in sectors where we're looking at how do you grow something at scale, right? Again, that's kind of rung 5 framing. And so for us, we're going, all right, if you are a mom in the neighborhood, juggling maybe 2 jobs, trying to figure out what time was school pickup today and was there football practice, right? Where do you go? Yeah. Right. And so framing for the folks we were talking to, we're building out rung 1, 2, 3, and 4 to then, and some folks just want to do a solopreneur thing and it's going to economically change their landscape. Other people want to give themselves the best job they ever had, right? They're full-time, but it's a full-time job they could never have imagined, right? Yeah. And then there's this other category that's about 9% of our graduates who we would call locally scalable. And those are the folks we've been so partnered with who are in Twin Day, or going into pre-flight or, launched into the EC ecosystem where you guys are grabbing them and going, sweet, let's go even further. You know what I mean? And so my focus for the last little bit has been telling that story and finding those right partners. So Shana can focus on the quality of the program.
Perfect.
And then all this is happening out there. Yeah. Right. These fun stories, oh my gosh, look at this growth. And, everyone thinks you're an overnight success, 10 years in the making kind of vibe. Right. And then at home, to bring us to No Elevator to Everest, at home, what's happening is both my kids are through domestic adoption. Out of Memphis, we've got Shelby County babies, right? And my son, we adopted both at birth, right? Okay. And my son, around age 2.5, the first indication that we were about to experience another T-bone moment in life, right, was that he stopped sleeping. And so not a couple blurry nights that all kind of, parents of young children know, but days turned to weeks, turned to months, turned to years, turned to multiple sleep studies, surgeries at Vanderbilt, all of that. And we started collecting diagnoses, right? And that was our introduction into the world of disability, right? And naively, initially, I thought, okay, cool. You get one diagnosis and you're done, and they hand you the playbook.
Yeah.
Right. Cool. I'm great at running playbooks. Let's do that. And then to come to find out, no, it's not periods, it's commas. Right. And in the face of that, which, I really can't exaggerate how intense the day-to-day kind of life was. My wife, and I've got permission to share this, her own journey of, experiencing clinical depression in the midst of that, right? And my whole pattern of life, without realizing it, was problem, fix, right? And I think that's really common for entrepreneurs, right? It's kind of the whole deal, right? And so I applied that system of thinking to my son, right?
How did that work?
Failed miserably, right? And also sucks to be viewed as a problem, right? Like that hurts my heart to even say it out loud, right? But I'm trying to do that out of a heart of love. Like, how do I help you, right? And I'm running into this brick wall. Oh man, it's not working. Same thing for my wife, right? And anybody who's listening who's ever had a loved one, go through a bout of depression knows that like you have to be with them, but you cannot solve for them. Yeah. Right. And so every day I am just like dying more inside because the pattern of life that I knew how to do is no longer working. Right. And in the midst of that, my wife found this amazing trauma therapy center, right? We call it trauma camp in our family.
Trauma camp.
Shout out to the work of Onsite. And she went, and when she came home, the seeds of like some new hope were there, right? And so I was very curious, but she was like, you have to go. And I was like, do I though? Aren't we as a family therapized enough? Right. Again, don't invent words when you're debating your spouse. Not a good sign. But she's an Enneagram 8. And if you know that world, like that's the challenger, knife fighter role, as am I. I'm also. Great. But she had that look in her eyes that's like, oh, my soul might decay in front of me if I don't, actually take this seriously. So I end up at Onsite. And the first day there, chip on my shoulder, I'm here to help her, right? Still problem solve mindset. I mean, the arrogance of it, right? Oh, end of day 2, though, I am cracked open, and I'm weeping and I'm like, I am here for me. Yeah. Right. And it reconnected me with myself. And I would say, from a faith perspective, like divine love, or what you might say, like, oh, my purpose or my calling, whatever language you want to use. But there was this like harmony, and I came home from that and I was like, okay, and this is 4 years ago. I was like, my context is not going to change, right? Like I'm going back into these rhythms in this setting, but I can't go back to that kind of life, right? The way I was getting eaten up inside, And so I asked this question as I came home: how do I turn my own life into a joy lab? What would it look like to retool everything where joy was the thing I was walking out and walking toward? And so I just started experimenting, like really entrepreneurially, but like aimed at myself. And that journey led to this book, which walks out that story of what I discovered and what has worked.
And so what was it like, or what was it like writing it, but even deciding that this experience needed to live as a book? Why a book?
Yeah. I mean, organically in my process, in my discovery, journey, I was writing a lot. Okay. So it was naturally happening. And in the course of that, I was like, oh, wait a minute, like maybe there's a thing here, right? And, obviously first, these are very vulnerable and raw stories. Like, first thing was just talking with Tiffany and going, hey, if I were to pursue this, and she, and I think incredibly bravely, was like, yeah, I want to support this. And cause like the healing journey you're talking about needs to be out there. And I get to be last editor. And I was like, yeah, absolutely.
Please.
Absolutely. I said I'd prefer to be married than have a book. So yes, that sounds great. Yeah. And so, and our family has been involved in disability support kind of networks over the years. And there's a lot of like how to on like the practical, tactical, maybe medical side and some of that. But there's surprisingly little for the mom and dad who are trying to show up in health in dynamic situations. I mean, I think this is also true of like, you and I, we might get to an age where we're a caregiver to our parents.
Sure.
Right? It's a really common story. Okay, like caregiving is caregiving. What does it look like to show up in health, doing your own interior work so that you can meet that moment even better?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the journey of the book.
And so what's the big dream for this book? I have to ask only because if we look at your life in these entrepreneurial stages of like, hey, let's try this other thing. I mean, there's something here again, not to clearly the goal is not riches and fame, just of who I know you to be, but the goal I assume is to help, to give some kind of a voice, to find a group who can use this, individuals who can. So talk to us a little bit about that, the hopes for this. We don't have to use the word goals, but what do you want to do with this?
Yeah, I mean, so I'll give you an example, a story from the book, right? Oftentimes when you're a family that's touched by disability, without realizing it, you start to bring the walls in closer. This kind of vacation is, out of reach because of how hard, the medical thing would be, or this disruptive pattern or whatever it is, right? There's a million moments like that, all the way down to, we don't go to that playground because of this, or, all of those kind of things, right? And without realizing it, I had come into like a very tight space, which was no longer life-giving for me or my family members, right? And so after this experience, oh my gosh, wait a minute, like we can actually build something different. We're not stuck, right? We were like, what would it look like to have an insanely amazing summer, right? Because summers had gotten so hard for us as a family because services are paused. You don't get the normal rhythms. Your kid's like, what is happening today? And you're like, I don't know, right? And so we were like, let's dream. And so one of the things that we did, my wife and I, we were like, why don't we check out as a family? And we found a little casita through a friend of a friend in a mud road surf village, 45 minutes from a gas station in Costa Rica, where like you could get a place for the price of like 1 week in Florida, right? Hyper affordable. And we could just live. What would that look like? And those kind of things shook us out of some of the stuckness, right? So when you ask like, hey, what do you hope this book does? My hope is that anybody, whether they're talking about disability or just some place in life where they're feeling stuck, that they would be able to grab a hold of this and go, hey, this is starting to churn some new creativity for me. What would it look like to navigate differently? So yeah, that's my ultimate hope, is that this would be a way for people to hope and dream.
And so where can people learn more about the book, about you, about Corner to Corner, if folks are listening to this and they want to dive in more on any of these resources?
Yeah, noelevatortoeverest.com is the best place to get all things book related. And you can grab a copy of the book from your bookstore of choice there. And then if you want to follow the journey of Corner to Corner, cornertocorner.org. And then Instagram, our Instagram is very lively. And it's just @corner. Yeah, would love to have y'all connect there.
Speaking of Corner to Corner, you guys have some exciting stuff coming up this month, right after this drops, early May. What's coming up for Corner to Corner most recently?
Yeah, so our graduation is May 12th at the Curb Center at Belmont University. So if you're hearing this and you are days away from that moment, come join us. This is a free, family-friendly moment. And I literally can't express how much joy is in that room, right? So we would love to have you come experience that community.
Yeah, I've been there, and you all, obviously, all of the cohorts graduate. You guys, is there a pitch competition?
Yeah, there'll be a compassionate pitch competition. So don't think Shark Tank, think like we love you and care about you and want to see you succeed.
And then, your entrepreneurs are showcasing their items. There's food, there's games. It is one of the liveliest nights and events that I've been to in the city. So,
and it's on a Monday night. And like, let's be honest, you don't have something else.
No, you don't.
Like, come out to this.
That's right. And these happen every 6 months or so, right?
Yeah. So if you're listening to this and it's July, right? Go to cornercorner.org and the next one is in November, and we'd love to have you there.
Well, Will, thank you for making time and being on this episode of Circle Back.
Yeah, it meant the world to me. Thank you, Sam, for having me.
You're welcome. And thank you for listening to this episode of Circle Back with entrepreneur, author, all-around guy who's just quitting good jobs, but starting better things, I would say, Will Acuff. It's been a joy. Of course, also a big thank you to the generosity of the Beth and Randy Chase family who make these episodes and this entire series possible. A big thank you to our friends at Nashville Post. And a big thank you to you, the listeners. Be sure to listen, to rate, and to share these podcasts wherever you enjoy them. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.